Hello, I'm Askar Sherlief and you're watching news from Kazakhstan. The trial of opposition members over the case of inciting social hatred is continuing in Aktau. Two witnesses of the defense activists of Alga political party were summoned for a provision of testimonies. Fatima Kasenova, the head of the East Kazakhstan regional branch of the party, and Marat Januzakov, head of the party branch in Akmola region. Fatima Kasenova came in a t-shirt with a photograph of Vladimir Kozlov and a sign demanding his release.
After thanking the prosecutor for an opportunity to promote her political party, Kasenova told the court about the structure of the organization, number of staff in the branch office and party sponsors. Prosecutors believe that a print on witness t-shirt is pressuring the judge, but in response one of the attorneys said that it was likely not the court that feels pressured, but the prosecutor. Marat Januzakov was questioned about the alleged purpose of the organization, the seizure of power by violence. The question was based on the transcripts of wiretaps of Skype conference calls that allegedly were held between the exiled banker Mukhtar Ablazov, residing in London, and activists of the Alga party. The prosecutors were interested in the meaning of Mukhtar Ablazov's words, "crush the authorities," allegedly mentioned during the conversation. Januzakov, a philologist, explained that this is just a figure of speech, and for example, when people say that a professor crushed someone during the test, everyone clearly understands that he didn't kill anyone. According to Januzakov, the term "crush the government" is the equivalent of "change the authorities." With their questions, they actually prove that our organization is not a part of an organized criminal group. The questions of the prosecutors actually served our defense. It means that the prosecutor has no grounds to accuse our party in being a part of the organized criminal group.
On Tuesday, the court questioned quite a lot of witnesses of the defense, as on Monday the judge completed the questioning of the witnesses of the prosecution. More details in the next report.
After recess, the head of the Aman Saulik Foundation, Bakhtulu Tumenova, was invited as defense witness in the case of Kozlov, Sapargali, and Aminov. During the examination, she told the court about the results of the poll conducted in Zhanaozen, which appear to be dramatically different compared to what the official media and authorities declared. 10% of the striking oil workers had high education degrees, 73% were married, 24% of the latter have more than 4 children, and 41.4% of strikers were the only breadwinners. The opinion poll also showed that 73.1% of them took bank loans, while 43% had no private property. Only 2.6% of the respondents are satisfied by provided health care. The most interesting part came when the court started questioning Tumenova. When the prosecutors were not too active, Akhjanat Aminov's lawyer Ardak Batsieva, notorious for her waywardness and implacability, attempted to pressure the witness. According to Tumenova, it seemed that the lawyer decided to aggravate the situation instead of supporting defendants and assume the role of the prosecutor. She tried to pressure me and aggravate the situation. I have an impression that she works for the bodies that try to ruin Kozlov, Sapargali, as well as others like Ablazov, Kitibayev, and to say that they are part of the organized crime group responsible for the mess in our country. During the break, it was revealed that the court decided to decrease the number of defense witnesses. 2 of them, local activists Nuriyash Abdriimova and Aloash Ongarova, spoke to reporters near the courthouse. Abdriimova says she was called by Sapargali's lawyer and told not to blab at the hearing and never mention the authorities and the nation's leader. The next day, though, she was just removed from the list of defense witnesses altogether. Looking at the way this lawyer behaves, it is obvious she's acting on behalf of the authorities. Why would she do this otherwise? I don't think that Sapargali barred me. She probably pressured him into doing this. I don't understand this, but I really do feel sorry for Sapargali. He has spent 8 months behind bars, and we do not know what he has been through. When 37 people from Zhanaozen were undergoing trial, we saw what it was like there. Once the activist of Alga, Aysuluk Adurbayeva, learned that the defendants don't get decent meals and Vladimir Kozlov has to wear the same clothes for a month, she hurried to treat her party leader and other defendants with some home-cooked meals. According to Kadyrbayeva, on Monday, civil rights activist Remis Turmagambetova agreed with the head of the Mangistar Regional Department of Interior to pass the food to the defendants in the courthouse. However, law enforcement officers did not live up to their promises. Vladimir Kozlov, the leader of the political party Alga, opposition politician Serik Sapargali, and civil activist oilman Akhjanat Aminov are charged with inciting social hatred, calling to overthrow constitutional order, and creating an organized criminal group. The trial will continue on Wednesday, when other witnesses for the defense will be called.
An influential national Spanish newspaper El País, with almost 500,000 circulation, published an article about Kazakhstan. A well-known Spanish journalist visited Astana and shared her impressions about the capital and the leader of the nation. The impressions turned to be quite negative.
The journalist compared the president with a pharaoh and called Astana, the pride of Kazakhstan, a cold city with ill-designed infrastructure. The political regime was also criticized and mentioned in the article as the state with no democracy. So why is this happening in the country which declared itself as democratic? In the article, the author comes to a simple conclusion that the wealth of natural resources lets the president of the country to solidify his regime, and no other state usually defending democracy is willing to quarrel with the oil-rich Kazakhstan. El País is known for its social democratic stance. The articles on Russia and Central Asian states appear in the newspaper quite often. One of the reasons why it published this article on Kazakhstan is the trial on opposition leaders currently underway. Astana is the most vivid manifestation of the dictator's megalomania. There is no public transportation, so Astana is a chaos of traffic jams with buildings and monuments that remind one of pharaohs. The assets of Nazarbayev stored abroad are estimated at more than 750 million euros, while his family owns many companies and properties in Kazakhstan. After the amendments introduced to the legislation, the ruling political party Nuratan collected 81% of the votes during January's parliamentary elections. The opposition didn't make to the parliament at all. The second largest fraction, Akjol, is led by Nazarbayev's son-in-law Timur Kulibayev, and the third are communists, descendants of the CPSU, which was once chaired by Nazarbayev. The media is wearing a muzzle, internet is controlled, and there is a law in place making it easy to shut down any newspaper. Insulting the honor and dignity of the president could lead to a prison term. The doors are open for foreign investments as the location is strategic. Kazakhstan is like a bride that doesn't want to pick a husband, but everyone still tries to flatter her as she is in demand.
Kazakhstan has practically legalized squealing. On Tuesday, during a briefing, financial police made an announcement that from now on, information about corruption crimes will be rewarded. In some instances, the amounts of rewards reach thousands of dollars. A special clause within the budget will cover the costs. Find out more from the next report.
On Thursday, the government signed a decree rewarding citizens for submitting information about corruption. While anonymous letters will not be considered, the authorities even announced set rates for denunciations. According to the official representative of the financial police, Murad Jamanbay, over $200,000 was allocated from the budget for the services of informants. The payment may be increased, since the cash reward is also quite large. Corruption-related administrative lump sum payment for denunciation. Corruption-related administrative cases, $325. Minor corruption-related criminal cases, $430. Moderate corruption-related criminal cases, $540. Severe corruption-related criminal cases, $755. Extreme corruption-related criminal cases, $1,080. The initiative of the authorities is currently one of the most discussed issues on the internet. The opponents compare the project to Stalinist times, when a great number of people was sentenced to prison camps due to denunciations. Some citizens now fear that the decree could be a tool to remove political competition. Senator Oralbay Abdukarimov is the ideological supporter of the system for awarding informants. He discards historical parallels and says that the time and people are different. The Stalinist era of purges is long gone. Fighting corruption is a no-holds-barred struggle. Reporting is one of the ways to fight it. Thus, it is necessary to award informants. The main thing is to involve people in the national struggle against corruption. According to Murad Jamanbay, all reports will be carefully considered. If it turns out that the information is not accurate, the informant will be brought to justice for false denunciation. However, financial police does not require their potential allies any testimony confirmation. The key thing is to timely inform the agency so it can take relevant measures. It means an informant does not have to provide any kind of confirmation. This person will be awarded only if his report helps the prosecuting agencies bring the corruption case to court and get a final judgment. Lawyer Sergei Utkin is skeptical about any benefits the innovation can bring. He says that law enforcement agencies themselves are overwhelmingly corrupted. Thus, even reported officials can get away with it in the current system. An informant will not be awarded anything, but will only make new enemies. A plain report to the police will not get off the ground. I'm sure that not a single informant will be rewarded. Corrupted officials will just give a bribe to get away with it. Only full and accurate information will work. Officials of the main anti-corruption agency say that population's help will trigger more effective ways to struggle with bribery and embezzlement. But they clarify that vigilant citizens will be awarded only after suspects are delivered a final judgment. Moreover, informers are promised security, but not after the verdict is passed.
Despite of the steps on legalizing the squealing, the number of people willing to work within the state structures, which is known for high corruption rates, is not decreasing. On Tuesday, there was even a record number of candidates, around 40, to fill in the position of a mid-level state servant. Several years ago, the contest for the same position was around 5 to 6 candidates. More details on the rising popularity of state service in the next report.
From now on, public observers will be monitoring the selection process of government officials in Kazakhstan, while applicants' interviews will be recorded on cameras. Such a thorough screening of candidates for employment with the government agencies increases credibility of contest committees and already caused an unprecedented boom, reports the Agency of Civil Service Affairs. Astana beat the record on Tuesday with 40 applicants for one civil servant vacancy on average, while the number of competitors for some positions reached as high as 60. We consider this a definite increase of trust in a competitive system. On the other hand, it implies more responsibility for us because we have to carry out a fair and impartial selection. This allows us to choose the most qualified candidates. The competition is indeed high, but incomes are quite humble. According to statistics, the average salary of Kazakh government employee is a little over $500. For comparison, it would cost just as much to rent a studio apartment in Astana. So what makes the government service so attractive for young citizens of Kazakhstan? Perhaps it's the prospect of fraudulent earnings, career development, or a matter of prestige. One of the applicants, Kuaныш Japakov, rejected all three options, saying that he would serve the country just for the sake of it. Everyone at some point in their lives realizes that they're no longer interested in material values. Alternatively, they prioritize them. That's when the person becomes capable of being helpful to society and the country. Member of Parliament Murat Abenov says that once, at the dawn of independence, he had to go through a tough competitive selection for the civil service himself. Abenov worked his way up to the deputy governor of one of the southern regions. But times have changed, and recently the selection system has been affected by corruption and nepotism, he says. Therefore, the Member of Parliament vehemently supports this new system, which he believes is more transparent. It is important to notice high competition with a 40-to-1 ratio, but in government agencies there are 5 or 4 applicants for one position on average, because people don't believe the competition process is fair. Those who apply are usually people with connections or those who are simply desperate for the job, and that is our selection pool. But when the competition is high, it gives us a great deal of choice. However, even the MP could not give a definite answer as to what caused the current spike of interest of working in the public service. The income is low, while the temptation to earn extra money is perhaps higher. Yet there is just as much risk involved, especially with the newly introduced law on reporting about corruption. Nevertheless, as was jokingly mentioned by one of the candidates, there will always be ways to bypass the law.
President of Kazakhstan Nursultan Nazarbayev initiated a major cleanup in the country. Many experts were surprised by the speech of the president on Monday during the opening of the parliamentary session. The national leader said nothing about the political situation and social tension in the country. However, he ordered to bring order on the streets and punish for petty crimes. The next report has won.
The next day after Nursultan Nazarbayev's speech delivered during the opening of the new political season, mass cleaning of streets has swept Astana. For instance, this is the Metropolitan Stadium that the nation's leader mentioned in his message. Almaty subway was also prominently featured in the president's speech. Nazarbayev noted that in a short time after the launch, the trains got covered in graffiti and seats were damaged. Nazarbayev was infuriated with citizens for their littering habits and said that everyone will have to take the broom for breaking the law. If one breaks a street light in the park, not only will he have to pay the damage, but also sweep sidewalks in the park for 2 weeks. Take the United States, for instance. There you can see celebrities and famous politicians, including congressmen, sweeping streets as legal punishment for minor misdemeanors. Every day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Asgarbek sweeps the streets of Almaty, making them cleaner. Most of public activists were confused by the president's sanitary speech that opened the parliamentary session. However, it took Asgarbek only a couple of words to understand the president's message. There are all kinds of people. Some throw litter into the bin, others throw it right in the sidewalk. Most of Almaty residents were skeptical about the president's initiative. However, there were some who fully support the idea. I think this is a bit harsh. You are made to sweep streets for 15 days just for throwing a cigarette butt on the sidewalk. I'd prefer to pay a fine. No labor punishments, no fines will change the situation. This is the mentality of the people, and it is different from the one in the Western cultures. Just like in the Soviet times, I think this practice should have been used long ago. I'm all for it. This, however, was not what the president's political opponents expected to hear from the head of state. A cleaning campaign is announced right at the time when the trials over Zhanaozian bloodshed are still underway, and the investigations of the Arkan-Kergen and Ilya Alatau National Park massacres are still open. It seems that all of this is happening in a different country because the nation's leader never even touched on the subject of political and social instability. I think there are two reasons for this. First, the president is going further and further away from reality. Perhaps this is what he wants, or it is caused by his environment. Second, the authorities on behalf of the president want to divert people's attention from issues on hand. I think the topic of cigarette butts lying on sidewalks should be brought up by the chief public health inspector and not the president. Nevertheless, Nursultan Nazarbayev thought that state property damaged by graffiti and corrective labor punishment for littering is more important. Maybe that was the reason why his traditional speech was not aired live on TV. It has become the habit of the president to conceal social problems. Normally, it is the MPs who open the parliament session in democratic countries, but here it's the other way around. The president opens it with a speech, and this is even spelled out in the constitution. That's because we are living under a dictatorship. Recently, it seems that Kazakhstan has been moving back towards Soviet values. The president's article, 20 Steps to Uniform Labor Society, came out in July last year. The city branch of the ruling party propagated the article by initiating a campaign with the pompous name Anti-Laziness. The modern world calls for new approaches on issues of propaganda, prudence, diligence, and healthy lifestyles. We need to apply a creative approach. Time has come for such projects as anti-laziness and labor boosts. The agenda now includes a war on welfarism and cleaning campaigns. The question still remains open as to when the authorities will start putting things in order in the policies pursued by them.
As indicated by a mini poll, the joint session of the parliament was not viewed in the regions as was expected. Only one person out of all surveyed watched the speech of the president. All the rest were either busy or were not interested in the event.
Honestly, I didn't watch it. I was too busy in the kitchen. Women are too busy earning money for the family, and we don't have time for TV. I didn't watch it as I was at work. His arguments were solid and apt, so I believe that he's a smart person. Unfortunately, I didn't watch it. I'm not following the news. What was it about? No, politics is a grown-up's game.
President of Kazakhstan promotes and welcomes organ donations and called everyone to perceive this with understanding. Doctors say that if this idea is popularized, it can save hundreds of lives.
The transplantology department was established in Kazakhstan in 1978, but only a few surgeries have been conducted to this day. Surgeon Daniyar Toksanbayev explains this by the lack of specialists and organ donors. In spite of all the publicity around this issue, people are still reluctant to volunteer. What Igor Voretnikov did recently may inspire thousands of people in need of liver surgery. The social awareness for donorship is still developing. It needs to be introduced in schools like in other countries, where school children already know what a donor, a recipient, and a transplant is. Likewise, I believe we need to start with schools, universities, and medical schools, introducing additional departments and courses for organ and tissue transplantation. This patient, Yermek Mukurov, was very fortunate. He married Olga Yurchenko 20 years ago. Back then, he would have never believed, aside from beauties and hardships of marriage, he will have to share one liver with his wife. According to Olga, she immediately decided to spare a part of her organ if it was a match for her husband. Now they're both in the recovery room, going through photos of their kids. The couple say Igor Voretnikov is a hero. After all, not everyone is ready to become a donor. I believe that with the current authorities in Kazakhstan, this issue needs to be solved fundamentally. People are prejudiced, but they will come around because the level of education will allow them to. Think Spain, which is a deeply religious Catholic country, but even there the church sided with such a law.
Mothers and wives of inmates from prison AK-159/5 in Karaganda region, as well as human rights activists, addressed a complaint to the head of state. To recount, they've been on the watch in front of the colony walls for more than 3 days, claiming that law enforcement officials are beating inmates. As the Correctional System Committee reported, inmates exhibited disobedience, which led to the use of force. The president has learned about the controversial incident on Monday, says Astana-based human rights activist Valery Karpusevich. In order to pass on the information to the head of state, he had to resort to unconventional methods. Namely, several people stood in the path of the national leader's motorcade.
On Monday, I placed people and myself on the road to block the route of the presidential motorcade. He ordered the security guard, the one that was riding the fourth from the back, to drive up to us and check what was going on. I showed them with symbols that I brought people here for a reason. These symbols showed that terrible events are happening, and in the meantime, the women were waving posters with our statements. About 30 minutes later, the head of the state returned from his Karaganda residence to Akarda. It is unknown whether this indeed happened, but the families of convicts continue to watch by the prison. According to them, law enforcement officers took the belongings of prisoners out of 2 trucks. It included blankets, personal care items and religious books such as Qurans and Bibles. According to convicts' relatives, the banned items were dumped in the landfill by the prison administration. Currently, spouses and mothers of prisoners are protecting the belongings that can prove the innocence of their close ones. In the meantime, their representatives are trying to reach the regional prosecutor's office. We met with the chief prosecutor, who scheduled an appointment beforehand. I told him that he's being misinformed about the events and my words were confirmed later. I told him that law enforcement officers were taking away items that are allowed in prison. For instance, blankets, pillows and even Qurans and Bibles were all taken away and dumped at the landfill. He immediately ordered Fazilov and other prosecutors to check my claims and, if confirmed, to take immediate action.
On Tuesday, Minister of the Interior spoke candidly about the detention of Alexei Shkilov, a huntsman of the burned-down cordon, in connection with the mass murder in the Ilya-Alatow National Park.
First of all, he was detained for firearm possession, and secondly, we are now investigating people who were there, and they have passed through his post. That's all I can tell you about for now. This August, 12 bodies were found in the national park near Almaty, including those of family members and friends of the gamekeeper Alexei Shkilov. The keeper himself was not at his post at the time of the murder. One version of events currently considered involves the complicity of terrorists who were liquidated in the Karasai region on August 17. Detectives investigating that incident later said that they found firearms under the rubble of the burned house, and apparently some witnesses claimed the firearms belonged to the gamekeeper.
Head of Kazakhstan's Bureau on Human Rights, Roza Akalbekova, strongly disagrees with the prosecutor's decision not to file criminal charges against the investigator, who may have exerted pressure on the border guard Vladislav Chelach. The supervisory body saw no body of a crime in the actions of the law enforcement officer.
Even if he exerted only moral pressure, it is still considered a crime, assuming that it's the least of what he did in order to force Chelach into confessing. There is still no information, no other investigators who were intimidating the border guard. However, the attorneys don't give up just yet. Human rights defender Teligen Berlikhajanov intends to have the case reinvestigated. Vladislav Chelach is suspected of killing 15 fellow soldiers at Arkan-Kergen outpost. The investigation has been underway for already 4 months. Following a psychiatric examination, the soldier announced that he was forced to make confessionary statements under pressure. Chelach identified the investigator who exerted pressure on him, but the criminal case hasn't been initiated. I will be flying to Taldykorgan either on Wednesday or Thursday to file a new motion, a request for additional verification activities.
Almaty Mayor Ahmedjan Yesimov addressed the government to allocate money for avalanche prevention system on Mount Makhnatka in Ilya-Alatow National Park. He voiced his request at the Cabinet of Ministers session. In response, Prime Minister Karim Asimov ordered the First Deputy Minister Sirik Akhmetov to take the ministers in charge and visit the site of emergency, where Almaty rescuers assure works are still continuing.
This is how Mount Makhnatka, that was engulfed in fire 2 weeks ago, looks today. Most of the rare fir trees turned to ashes, and tree roots continue to emit smoke in some parts of the Ilya-Alatow Park. Rescuers say that the operation on the elimination of fire aftermath is not completed just yet. Currently, 3 teams of the Almaty Fire Department are guarding the site of the fire. You can see some areas still burning on the slopes, especially at night. There are 25 people and 3 fire engines here. Emergency rescue services, 3 vehicles and around 10 people will assist in removal of the burned remains of the trees, including roots. Once the removal is complete, rescuers will install an avalanche prevention system because tree roots that used to stop the mud and snow flows are no longer there. Specialists are still deciding on what caused the fire and who is responsible for the environmental damage. The causes are yet unknown, and the primary inquest was conducted by the investigation department of the Almaty Emergency Department. On August 31st, the materials of the case were handed over to the Regional Department of Emergencies in Talghar, and they will take over the investigation. There are many theories circulating, and the inquest will look into the real reasons of the fire. The Minister of Emergency Situations also reported on the progress of rescuers. Vladimir Bashko noted the well-coordinated work of his subordinates, but did not say anything about the possibilities to prevent the fire. The situation there is complicated. You know that we reacted extremely fast to the incident in Makhnatka and managed to extinguish the flames in a very difficult circumstance at a short time. Though the situation is far from simple, we hope to manage to get through. All available forces of Almaty region and Kazakhstan Rescue Aviation are involved in the operation. This is not the first emergency in Kazakhstan this year. At the end of February, a number of small towns in the South Kazakhstan region suffered due to extensive floods. Many are convinced that these events could be prevented with right preparation, including legislative measures. Analytics say now that in order to prevent natural cataclysms turning into emergencies, state control in the area of ecology must be tightened. I believe that the Emergencies Ministry has to deal with the consequences of these situations, in part due to a lack of environmental policies in Kazakhstan. There is no legislation on specially protected natural areas. These places are often turned into backyards where everything is allowed: construction works, illegal garbage dumps, hunting and lumbering. Of course, when these territories are in such a state, emergencies are prone to happen any time. The fire at Mount Makhnatka is a continuation of the troubles that struck the mountain slopes in May, when the destructive hurricane rolled over Almaty. The Emergencies Ministry estimates the damages at over $1 million. Specialists hope to restore the national park area to its previous state, though they admit that the volume of works is colossal. Only the fallen trees that have to be removed number in thousands, and it will likely take hundreds of years to fully restore the forest. Over $200,000 will be assigned from the state budget for these purposes.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching us. Stay well.